"Pretend you're his dad for an hour," she said, her voice breathless. Rain streaked the glass of the 40th floor window behind her. Rowan Astor looked up from the smudge he was wiping off a conference room door. He recognized her instantly. Adria Adler, the CEO. Her picture was on the wall in the main lobby. In person, her power suit was sharper, but her eyes were filled with a panic that didn't belong on this floor. "I'm sorry?" Rowan asked, his voice quiet. He was the night janitor. They didn't talk to each other. "1 hour," she repeated, flicking her gaze toward the boardroom doors. "Matilda Dean, the board chair, is here. She's doing a final review. She insisted on meeting my family." Rowan's eyes followed her glance, and then he saw him. A small boy, maybe 7, stood half-hidden behind her. He wore a stiff blazer and clutched a small, gray stuffed wolf like it was a lifeline. He was staring at the floor, absolutely still. "My husband. He couldn't make it," Adria stammered, the lie thin and unconvincing. Rowan knew there was no husband. The whole building knew. He looked back at the CEO, then at the silent boy. He understood. This was a performance, and she needed another actor. "Why me?" The question seemed to steady her. "I saw you last week, in the lobby, with your daughter. You were kneeling to tie her shoe." Her voice dropped. "You looked like you knew what you were doing." The unspoken part hung in the air between them. "And I don't." Rowan felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. This was wrong. He was a father, a real one. It was the only job title he cared about. Faking it felt like a betrayal of his own daughter, Alara. He shook his head slightly, a silent no. Adria saw the movement and her panic surged. "I'll pay you," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "Your salary for a year, just name it." Rowan's jaw set. He looked past her at the boy, who still hadn't looked up. He saw the tension in the boy's small shoulders. This wasn't about a CEO's contract anymore. It was about the child in the middle of the storm. "It's not about money," he said, his voice firm. He met Adria's gaze. He was just the janitor, but in this moment, he wasn't the one who was powerless. He let the silence stretch, then gave a single, reluctant nod. "Okay, 1 hour." Adria's relief was a physical thing. She nearly sagged against the wall. "Thank you. His name is Finian. We call him Finn. Just pretend you adore him." "No," Rowan said, the words stopping her cold. He stepped past her and crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. He ignored Adria entirely. "Hey," he said softly. Finn flinched, then slowly lifted his head. His eyes were wide and unnervingly perceptive. Rowan gestured with his chin toward the stuffed animal. "That's a serious-looking wolf." Finn's grip tightened. "His name is Fenris," he whispered. "Fenris," Rowan said, nodding like this was important information. "A wolf named Fenris must be a very good protector." The boy gave the smallest of nods. Rowan looked up at Adria, who was watching them, completely bewildered. "I have one condition," he said, his voice low and clear. "For the next hour, you follow my lead. No suggestions, no interruptions. My way." Adria stared at the man in the simple gray uniform who was now dictating terms to her. She was out of options. She nodded. "Okay." Rowan turned back to Finn. "All right, Finn. We're going to go meet a woman named Matilda. It's going to be very boring. So let's make a secret game. If I tug on my right ear, it means it's your turn to tell her about Fenris. Deal?" A flicker of something, not a smile, but a spark of interest, appeared in Finn's eyes. He nodded again. Rowan stood up. He glanced at the imposing boardroom doors, then back at the makeshift family. He offered his hand to the boy. "Let's go." After a beat of hesitation, a small hand slipped into his. Rowan's large, calloused hand closed gently around it. He looked at Adria. "Ready?" She wasn't, but she took a deep breath, straightened her jacket, and put on the mask of a CEO again. Together, the three of them walked toward the doors. The hour was ticking. Adria pushed the heavy oak door open. The boardroom was a cavern of glass and polished mahogany, dominated by a table long enough to land a plane on. At the far end, framed by a floor-to-ceiling window that showcased the rain-swept city, sat Matilda Dean. She was an elegant woman in her late 60s with silver hair coiled in a perfect chignon and a smile that didn't quite reach her piercing blue eyes. She didn't look like a predator, but Rowan knew a person who watches for weakness when he saw one. "Adria," Matilda said, her voice smooth as velvet. "And this must be the famous Finian." Adria forced a bright smile. "Matilda, thank you for waiting. And this is my partner, Rowan." Matilda's gaze shifted to Rowan. It was a slow, deliberate appraisal, taking in his simple, clean work pants and cotton shirt, so starkly out of place in this world of tailored silk and Italian leather. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Mr. Astor," she said, her smile tightening a fraction. "Adria has been remarkably private about you." Rowan felt a protective squeeze on his hand from Finn. He gave the boy's hand a reassuring squeeze back. "I tend to stay out of the spotlight," Rowan said, his voice even. He didn't offer excuses or apologies for his attire. He just stated a fact. A wise choice in this day and age, Matilda conceded, though her eyes were still sharp with scrutiny. "Please, sit." They took seats across the polished table. Adria sat ramrod straight, a stark contrast to Rowan, who settled into his chair and immediately turned his attention to helping Finn get situated, making sure his chair was close enough to the table. It was a small, paternal gesture, so natural that Adria felt a pang of jealousy. "So Finn," Matilda began, leaning forward, "your mother tells me you're quite the scientist. What's the latest project?" Finn froze, his eyes darting to his mother, then to Rowan. He looked like a cornered animal. Rowan saw the panic rising in him and subtly tugged on his right ear. The boy's gaze locked on the signal. He took a tiny, shaky breath, and his free hand went to the stuffed wolf in his lap. "Fenris," he mumbled. "I'm sorry," Matilda asked, leaning closer. "His name is Fenris," Finn said, a little louder this time. He held up the toy. "He's an Arctic wolf. They can survive in temperatures below -50 degrees Celsius. Their paws have a special circulatory system to keep the pads from freezing." The room went silent. Adria stared, dumbfounded. She had never heard her son string that many words together in front of a stranger. Matilda looked genuinely impressed. "Is that so? A well-informed protector. I see you've inherited your mother's mind for details." She turned her sharp gaze back to Rowan. "And what about your father? Does he share your interest in science, Finn?" Before Finn could tense up again, Rowan answered smoothly. "I'm more interested in how things work. Finn handles the why." He smiled at the boy. "We make a good team." "A team," Matilda repeated, tasting the word. "That's important. And what is it you do, Rowan? Where does your work fit into the team?" This was the landmine. Adria's knuckles went white where she gripped her pen. Rowan didn't hesitate. "I work for this company," he said simply. He met Matilda's gaze without flinching. "I help take care of the building, make sure everything runs the way it's supposed to." It was the truth, the beautifully ambiguous truth. Matilda nodded slowly, interpreting it as facilities management or operations, a respectable, if unglamorous, corporate role. The quiet competence he projected sold the rest. "An essential job," she declared. "A company is like a family. It's only as strong as its foundations." She smiled, a genuine one this time, directed at Finn. "Your father is a very wise man." Adria let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. They were navigating it. Rowan was navigating it. He was a natural, his quiet confidence a more effective shield than any lie she could have concocted. For the next 20 minutes, Rowan guided the conversation. He deflected questions he couldn't answer with simple, honest statements about fatherhood. drawn from his own life with Alara. He spoke of building forts out of couch cushions and the importance of a good nightlight. When Finn would start to fade, Rowan would use their secret signal, and the boy would offer another small fact about wolves or robotics, his voice growing a little stronger each time. Rowan was building a bridge to the boy in real time, and all of Adria's power and money felt like useless rubble in the face of it. Finally, Matilda glanced at the ornate clock on the wall. "Well, this has been a delight. It's clear you have a wonderful, stable home life, Adria. It sets my mind at ease." She began gathering her things. "I was so pleased to hear you finally set up a proper office for Rowan here at the building. It's so important for a man to have his own space." Adria's smile froze on her face. A cold dread washed over her. Rowan's expression didn't change, but he felt Finn's hand go rigid in his. Matilda stood up, her eyes twinkling. "In fact, why don't we walk past it? Finn, you can show me the picture you drew that your mother said you framed for your father's desk." The air in the room turned brittle. Adria's smile was a porcelain mask threatening to crack. An office? A drawing? She had invented the detail in a pre-meeting brief for Matilda, a throwaway line to add a touch of color to her fabricated stable life. She had never imagined it would be called upon as evidence. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, a renovation, a last-minute move. But she knew any lie would sound flimsy and desperate. Before she could speak, Rowan's calm voice cut through the tension. "Actually, Matilda," he said, his tone polite but firm, as if he were about to discuss a routine maintenance issue. He stood up, subtly placing himself between Matilda and the door. "Before we go anywhere, I'm glad I have you here. I noticed something on my way in that I wanted to bring to your attention." Matilda paused, her handbag halfway to her shoulder. "Oh? What is it?" Rowan gestured vaguely toward the ceiling in the corridor outside. "There's a small water stain developing on the ceiling tile just above the main electrical junction for this wing. With the storm we're having, I'm concerned about a potential leak. I'd feel better if I could just show you. It will only take a moment." He delivered the lines with the unassailable authority of a man who knows every pipe and wire in the building. Because he did. The stain was real. He'd scheduled it for repair next week. It was a janitor's problem, but in his quiet, confident telling, it sounded like a high-level operational risk. Matilda's focus shifted instantly. A faulty building was a direct threat to her investment. The twinkle in her eye was replaced by a look of sharp concern. "A leak near the electrical? Good heavens, yes, of course. Show me." The topic of the office evaporated. "Adria, Finn, why don't you wait for us by the elevators?" Rowan said, already guiding Matilda out of the boardroom and in the opposite direction of the executive suites. He was taking control, steering the most powerful woman in the company with nothing but a janitor's knowledge. Adria watched them go, her heart hammering against her ribs. She sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. She looked at her son. Finn was watching the door Rowan had disappeared through, his expression not scared, but awestruck. He was looking at a hero. He's very clever," Finn whispered. "Yes," Adria breathed, the word feeling inadequate. "Yes, he is." A few minutes later, Rowan returned, his expression placid. "All sorted," he said. "I've had my team shut down the secondary circuit until we can get a look at it in the morning. No risk." Adria simply nodded, unsure what to say. He had saved her, saved them, with a lie that was woven from the absolute truth of his real job. They met Matilda by the elevator bay. She was no longer looking at them as a test to be graded, but as a team that had competently handled a problem. "Thank you, Rowan," she said, pressing the call button. "Your attention to detail is an asset. It's clear Adria is in good hands both at work and at home." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Relief, pure and potent, washed over Adria. The hour was almost up. They had survived. Matilda stepped into the elevator, then turned, holding the door with her hand. She smiled that inscrutable smile again. "This has been so enlightening, So much better than a stuffy meeting. We were happy to have you, Adria said, her own voice sounding surprisingly steady. Good, Matilda said, her eyes finding Rowan's. Then you won't mind if my assistant calls you to schedule a proper dinner. At your home. I'm hosting a small gathering for our Japanese investors next month, and I think a quiet, authentic family meal would be the perfect way to show them the real values of this company. Her gaze flicked to Finn. And besides, I simply must see that drawing of yours in person. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving the three of them standing in the sudden, ringing silence of the hallway. The 1-hour charade had just been extended indefinitely, and now they had to build a home. The polished steel doors slid shut, encasing Matilda Dean in a quiet hum of machinery. Her reflection smiled back at them for a fraction of a second before vanishing. The silence she left behind was heavy and absolute. It was Adria who broke it. The sound was a choked gasp, the noise of a person who had been holding their breath for an hour and was now drowning in air. "A dinner?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She turned to Rowan, her eyes wide with a new, higher-octane panic. "At our home? We don't have a home. She wants to see a drawing that doesn't exist on a desk in an office you don't have in a house we don't share. This is a catastrophe." Rowan saw Finn flinch at his mother's sharp tone. The boy's hand, which was still loosely held in his, squeezed hard. Rowan immediately knelt, turning his back to Adria to shield the boy from her spiraling fear. "Hey, Finn," he said, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the panic radiating from Adria. "The secret game is over. You were a champion, the best partner a guy could ask for." He gave the boy's hand a final, warm squeeze. Before letting go, "I need to talk to your mom about some boring adult stuff now. Can you go with her assistant and draw me a picture of Fenris fighting a snow monster? I need to see how strong he is." Finn looked from Rowan's steady face to his mother's frantic one. He nodded, the mission giving him a sense of purpose. Adria, jolted by Rowan's words, fumbled for her phone and speed-dialed her assistant. "Jess, I need you outside the boardroom. Now take Finn to my office." Her voice was clipped and strained. When the assistant arrived and whisked the boy away, Adria's composure finally shattered. She paced the length of the corridor, her heels clicking in agitated rhythm on the marble floor. "It's over. I'm ruined. A dinner? With investors?" "She's testing me. This was all a test, and I failed." She ran a hand through her perfectly styled hair, messing it up. "I have to call her. Make an excuse. A family emergency. And what happens when she wants to reschedule?" Rowan's voice was quiet, cutting through her frantic monologue. "What happens when she sends a gift basket to your home address and finds a penthouse for one?" Adria stopped pacing. She stared at him. "Then what do you suggest we do? You heard her. This isn't an hour anymore. I don't even know what this is." "I know," Rowan said. The deal was for 1 hour. The hour was up. He could walk away. He could go back to his quiet life, to the scent of sawdust in Alara's elementary school classroom and the simple peace of his small apartment. He could leave this powerful, terrified woman to the mess she had created. But then he thought of Finn's small hand in his. He thought of the flicker of life in the boy's eyes when they'd played their secret game. Walking away felt like pulling a lifeline from a drowning child. "The deal was for an hour," he said, making sure she understood the choice he was making. "That hour is done." Adria's face paled. "I know. I'll double the money. Triple it." "I told you it's not about the money," he said, a hint of steel in his voice. He crossed his arms, his posture solid, immovable. "You have an apartment, don't you?" "Of course I have an apartment," she shot back, her voice brittle with stress. "It's a penthouse 2 miles from here. It's all glass and white leather. It looks like a magazine, not a home. There isn't a single fingerprint on anything that wasn't put there by a housekeeper." "Then we make it a home," Rowan said, the words simple and direct. Adria stared at him, baffled. "What are you talking about? How?" "By making it messy," he said. "A real home is messy. It has scuff marks and mismatched coffee mugs. and a kid's drawing stuck to the fridge with a magnet that's shaped like a banana. He started thinking out loud, the problem solver in him taking over. We'll need pictures, framed ones, on the walls, on the tables. A photo of you and Finn at the beach. One of me and Finn at a park. Those photos don't exist. We'll take them, he countered. This weekend, we'll need toys that look like they've actually been played with. A half-finished puzzle on a table. A pair of my boots by the door. He paused. My life has to be in your apartment. A new complication dawned on Adria's face. Your life, she repeated slowly. Rowan, what about your daughter, Ilara? Where does she fit into this perfect family? It was the question Rowan had been waiting for. The biggest, most dangerous piece of the puzzle. He couldn't hide his own child. He wouldn't. He looked at Adria, at the woman who had asked him to perform the most sacred role in his life for a paycheck and a promotion. He had helped her. Now she was going to learn something. I'll keep helping you, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We'll make a plan for the dinner, but on my terms, all of them. Anything, she breathed, ready to agree to whatever he said. Good, Rowan said, because our first step has nothing to do with your apartment or Matilda's investors. He took a step closer, his gaze pinning her. Tonight, after my shift, you're coming with me. You're going to meet my daughter. You're going to sit in my messy living room and see her homework on the table. He let the words sink in. If you want me to build you a fake family, Adria, you're going to have to spend some time with a real one first. The drive to Rowan's apartment was silent. Adria sat in the back of her chauffeured town car, the smooth leather cool against her skin, and watched the city's landscape shift from glittering corporate towers to low-slung brick apartment buildings. Rowan sat in the front passenger seat, having given the driver the address in a low, even voice. He looked perfectly calm, as if escorting his CEO to his humble home was a routine part of his day. The building was a clean 3-story walk-up with a tidy row of hedges out front. It was aggressively normal. When Rowan unlocked the door to his apartment, number 2B, and flicked on the light, Adria felt like she had stepped into another dimension. The air smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent. A pair of small, rainbow-colored boots were kicked off by the door next to a pair of Rowan's sturdy work shoes. The living room was small, dominated by a comfortable-looking couch with a lumpy, hand-knitted afghan thrown over it. A half-finished drawing of a unicorn was taped to the wall, and the coffee table was cluttered with a library book, a few stray Lego pieces, and a mug with a chip in the rim. It was the antithesis of her own silent, white penthouse. It was a home. A small, dark-haired girl with bright, curious eyes peered around the corner from the hallway. She had a streak of purple paint on her cheek and was wearing pajamas covered in cartoon planets. "Daddy, you're home," she chirped. She launched herself at Rowan, who caught her in a one-armed hug, lifting her off the floor effortlessly. "Hey, Rocket Girl," he murmured into her hair. "Did Mrs. Gable get you dinner?" "Spaghetti," the girl announced. She then leaned around Rowan, her gaze landing on Adria. She stared, her head tilted. "Who's that?" "Ilara, this is Adria. She's my boss," Rowan said simply, setting his daughter back on her feet. "She's going to hang out for a little while." Ilara took a step forward, her expression serious. "Why are you so fancy?" she asked, pointing a small, spaghetti sauce-stained finger at Adria's silk suit. "Is it a costume?" Adria froze. She had chaired meetings with hostile foreign governments and had never felt so thoroughly scrutinized. No, it's what I wear for work." "Oh," Ilara said, as if this was a deeply unsatisfactory explanation. She looked at Rowan. "Does she know we have to finish Chapter 4 of The Dragon's Tooth?" "She knows that Chapter 4 is very important," Rowan said smoothly, already moving toward the small, open kitchen. "I'm just going to make some cocoa. You can show Adria your rock collection." Before Adria could protest, Ilara had taken her hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong, and was pulling her toward a corner of the room where a shoebox was overflowing with rocks of various shapes and sizes. For the next 10 minutes, Adria found herself sitting on the floor, her expensive suit bunching uncomfortably, as Ilara gave her a detailed lecture on the difference between quartz and granite. From the kitchen, Rowan watched them. He didn't interfere. He let Adria navigate the minefield of a child's unfiltered curiosity on her own. He saw her initial stiffness, the way she answered Ilara's questions with the polite distance of a manager handling an employee's inquiry. But then, Ilara pulled out a flat, smooth stone. "This one is my favorite," she said, pressing it into Adria's palm. "I gave it to Daddy for his birthday because it looks like a worried face, and I told him he doesn't have to be worried anymore." Adria stared at the rock. It did look like a worried face. She looked up and met Rowan's eyes over the kitchen counter. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. He wasn't just showing her his home. He was showing her his heart. An hour later, Ilara was tucked into bed, and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Adria sat on the lumpy couch, a mug of hot cocoa warming her hands. It was the first time all day she felt like she could breathe. "She's incredible," Adria said softly. "Yeah," Rowan agreed, sitting in the armchair opposite her. "She is." A beat of silence. Then, "Business." "Okay," Rowan said, leaning forward. "The dinner. Matilda is expecting a home, a family. What you have is a showroom. We have to change that." For the next hour, they worked. Rowan, with a notepad and a pen, was the strategist. Adria, for the first time, was the one taking notes. "First, the kitchen," he said. "Your fridge is empty. We'll need to stock it, and we need clutter. A grocery list held up by a magnet. A stack of mail on the counter. Cereal boxes. I have a pantry. Everything is in labeled containers," Adria said. "Exactly," Rowan replied without looking up. "No one lives like that. Next, the living room. That white sofa needs a dent in it. We'll bring this Afghan and my armchair. It looks like a dad's chair. You want to move your furniture into my penthouse? If you want to sell the lie, yes." He continued, ticking off items. "We'll need toys, Legos, a half-done board game, and pictures. We need to take pictures this weekend. You, me, and Finn. At the park, getting ice cream. Normal things." He paused, his pen hovering over the page. "Which brings us to Ilara. What do we tell Matilda?" Adria asked, her voice low. "The truth, mostly," Rowan said. "She's my daughter. You and I are a couple. We're a blended family. It's complicated, but it's believable. We tell her we've been together for about a year. It explains why she hasn't met me before." The plan was insane. It was a web of logistics and lies that felt destined to collapse. But as Rowan spoke, laying it out piece by piece, it began to sound possible. When they had a rough outline, Adria finally put her mug down. The warmth had seeped into her bones, but she still felt a deep, profound chill inside. She looked around the small, love-filled room, at the unicorn drawing and the chipped mug, and a wave of loss for her own life hit her with breathtaking force. She looked at Rowan, the janitor, the fake father, the master strategist. "Rowan," she said, her voice barely a whisper, all the CEO armor stripped away. "How do you do it? With Ilara? How do you always know the right thing to say?" Rowan stopped writing. He looked at her, and his expression was not one of pity, but of simple, sad understanding. "You just listen to what they're not saying," he said. "And you show up. You just keep showing up." He closed his notebook. "That's the first lesson, and you're going to learn it with Finn this weekend." The park on Saturday was a riot of noise and color. Children shrieked on the swings, dogs chased frisbees, and the scent of cut grass hung in the air. It was a world away from the silent, climate-controlled halls of Adria's life. She felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe, dressed for the expedition in a crisp trench coat and designer loafers that were entirely unsuited for walking on damp grass. "Okay," Rowan said, pulling a phone from his pocket. "First things first, we need evidence." He gestured to a large oak tree. "Go stand over there, both of you." Adria and Finn obeyed, standing stiffly by the tree trunk. Finn clutched Fenris to his chest, his expression wary. "Right. Look like a family," Rowan instructed from 10 feet away. "Adria, put your arm around him. Maybe smile like you're not about to face a hostile takeover." Adria draped her arm awkwardly over Finn's shoulders. The boy flinched. She forced a smile that felt like a grimace. Rowan took a picture. "That looks terrible," he said with brutal honesty. "It looks like you've taken him hostage. Finn, can you try to look like you're not about to be eaten by the strange lady?" Finn buried his face in his wolf's fur. Adria's frustration mounted. This was impossible. She could negotiate a billion-dollar merger, but she couldn't take a convincing photograph with her own son. They tried again by the duck pond, and again on a park bench. Each photo was worse than the last, a collection of stilted, joyless moments that screamed fake. Finally, Rowan sighed. He put his phone away. "This isn't working." He looked from Adria's tense face to Finn's withdrawn one. "I'm going to get us some ice cream. You two talk." He turned and walked toward the small vendor cart near the park entrance, deliberately leaving them alone. Panic seized Adria. The silence between her and her son felt vast and unbridgeable. She tried to remember what she was supposed to do. She was the CEO. She was a leader. She should lead the conversation. "Finn," she began, her voice formal. "What are your primary objectives for this afternoon? Is there a particular activity you wish to engage in?" Finn shrank further into his jacket and shook his head, his eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement. She had failed. The silence returned, heavier this time. Adria felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. She looked at this strange little boy who was her son and felt nothing but the gulf between them. Then, Rowan's words echoed in her mind. "Listen to what they're not saying." She stopped trying to talk. She just sat there, on the bench, and watched him. She noticed the way he was methodically rubbing the worn ear of his stuffed wolf. She saw him glance over at the playground, his eyes lingering on the tallest slide for a long moment before looking quickly away. He wasn't saying he wanted to go on the slide. He was saying he was scared. She took a breath and tried something new. She didn't talk about his objectives. She didn't ask him a question. She shared a piece of herself. "That slide," she said softly, nodding toward the playground. "They call it the Green Giant. It's been here since I was a little girl." Finn's head tilted slightly. He was listening. "I was terrified of it," Adria admitted. "My father dared me to go down it. He offered me $5. I climbed all the way to the top, looked down, and climbed right back down again." She let out a small, genuine laugh. "I never did get that $5. Finn looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time all day, the guarded, wary expression was gone, replaced by simple curiosity. "Why were you scared?" he asked, his voice small. "Because it was so high," Adria said. "I thought I'd fall off the top." "You can't fall off," Finn said, his voice matter-of-fact. "The sides are 2 feet high. The statistical probability of falling out is 0.001%. Adria stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I read it on the sign," he said, pointing to the small plaque at the base of the slide. A slow smile spread across Adria's face, a real one this time. "Well," she said, "I guess I didn't have all the data." She reached out, not to touch him, but to gently flick the nose of his wolf. "Maybe Fenris would be brave enough." "Fenris isn't scared of anything," Finn said with a hint of pride. Just then, Rowan returned, holding 3 ice cream cones. He stopped a few feet away, seeing them. They weren't touching. They weren't even looking at each other. But they were sharing the same space, the air between them charged with a quiet, new energy. He lifted his phone, and without a word, He took a picture. In the photo, Adria was smiling softly at her son, and Finn was looking back at her, his face open and engaged. It was the first piece of evidence that wasn't a complete lie. The rest of the afternoon was easier. They didn't become a perfect family overnight, but the ice between them had cracked. They took more photos. A slightly awkward one of them feeding ducks. A blurry one of Finn actually pointing at something with a hint of a smile. As they were walking back to the car, a fragile sense of hope bloomed in Adria's chest. Maybe this wasn't impossible. Maybe she could learn. Then, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out. It was a text from Matilda Dean. "Adria, darling, so looking forward to our little dinner party. I've taken the liberty of engaging a wonderful caterer I know, Jean-Pierre. He's the best. He'll need access to your kitchen the day of. His assistant will send over the proposed menu for your approval. We must make sure it's perfect for our Japanese partners. Talk soon." Monsieur Adria's blood ran cold. A caterer. In her kitchen. The lie was growing legs, arms, and a team of professional chefs. She looked from the terrifying text message to Rowan's calm face and knew that their weekend of make-believe was over. The real high-stakes performance was just beginning. Adria's phone felt like a block of ice in her hand. The hope from the park evaporated, replaced by cold dread. "A caterer," she said, her voice flat as she read the text message aloud to Rowan in the car. "Jean-Pierre, he's a culinary artist. He doesn't just cook, he interrogates kitchens. He'll take one look at my sub-zero fridge with its single bottle of sparkling water, and he'll know. He'll know no one actually eats there." Finn, strapped into his booster seat in the back, looked from his mother's panicked face to Rowan's calm one. Rowan didn't flinch. He simply processed the new information. "Okay," he said after a moment. "So we have a new variable. It doesn't change the plan. It just makes the details more important." "Details?" Adria's voice rose. "Rowan, my kitchen is a laboratory. His kitchen is a temple. They don't speak the same language?" "Then we'll teach yours a new one," he said, his voice so steady it was almost jarring. He turned to the driver. "Change of destination. Take us to the target on 8th Avenue. The driver, a man who was used to shuttling Adria between boardrooms and airports, blinked in confusion, but obeyed. The next 2 hours were the most surreal of Adria's life. She found herself walking the brightly lit aisles of a Target, pushing a red shopping cart while the janitor from her company systematically deconstructed her life. "No, not that one," Rowan said, taking a sleek, minimalist black picture frame from her hands and replacing it with a garish silver one that had the words "Making Memories" embossed on it. Real families have bad taste sometimes. He led her through the store like a seasoned commander planning an invasion. He had her buy a hideous, brightly colored cookie jar shaped like a rooster. "It's for the counter. It has to be seen from the door." A pack of mismatched Disney-themed plastic plates. They get mixed in with the real plates. It's called chaos. And a magnetic whiteboard for the fridge. "What's this for?" Adria asked, holding it as if it were a foreign artifact. "For writing notes to each other," Rowan said, "and for the grocery list." He grabbed a box of sugary cereal with a cartoon character on the front. "And for buying things a nutritionist would never approve of." In the home goods aisle, she watched as he picked out a set of cheap, thick coffee mugs. One said, "Don't talk to me until I've had my coffee." Adria, who drank her espresso from a delicate porcelain cup every morning, felt a wave of dizziness. Back at her penthouse, the transformation began. Rowan was the director, and she was his reluctant stagehand. "Okay, first the fridge," he announced. He took a carton of milk and put it on the top shelf. He opened the box of sugary cereal and left it on the counter, slightly ajar. Then he handed Adria the magnetic whiteboard. "Write a grocery list. Milk, bread, bananas, and something a kid would want. Something you would never buy." Adria stared at the blank board, then hesitantly wrote in her perfect clean script, "Gummy dinosaurs." "Good," Rowan said. He then took one of the photos from the park, the one where she was genuinely smiling at Finn, and stuck it crookedly on the fridge with a cheap rooster magnet they'd bought. He moved through her silent, perfect apartment like an agent of chaos. He put a small, almost invisible scuff mark on the wall by the front door. He took her collection of art books and stacked them unevenly on the coffee table, placing a half-finished glass of water on top of them. He brought in a box from his own truck. Inside was his worn, comfortable-looking armchair, which he placed in her living room, where it looked like a sheep in a pack of wolves. He put his chipped World's Best Dad mug on her marble kitchen island. With each addition, the apartment felt less like hers and more like something else. Something lived in. Then he began hanging the pictures. He put the tacky Making Memories frame on a side table, the photo of the three of them by the duck pond looking strangely at home in it. Adria watched him work. "Finn," she said softly, more to herself than to Rowan. "He looked happy today, in that picture." "He was," Rowan said without turning around. "You told him a real story. He wasn't a prop in that moment. He was just a boy, listening to his mom." The words hit Adria with the force of a physical blow. The apartment was ready. It was a mosaic of their two lives, her expensive, minimalist taste and his warm, comfortable clutter. It was a lie, but it was a beautiful one. Adria looked around the living room, at his chair sitting next to her sofa, at the drawings taped to her fridge, and felt a strange pang in her chest. It felt more like a home than it had in the 7 years she'd lived there. The doorbell rang. They both froze. They weren't expecting anyone. The caterer, Jean-Pierre, wasn't due for a preliminary visit until tomorrow afternoon. Adria's heart pounded as she went to the door and opened it. Standing in the hallway was a tall, severe-looking man with a pencil-thin mustache and a chef's jacket so white it was blinding. "Bonjour," he said, his voice thick with a French accent. "I am Jean-Pierre. I was in the neighborhood, and I wished to see the space, to feel its ambiance, before I begin my work." He swept into the apartment before Adria could respond, his critical eyes darting everywhere, taking in every detail of their carefully constructed lie. Rowan stood motionless by the kitchen island, his face a mask of calm. Jean-Pierre walked through the living room, his gaze lingering on Rowan's armchair. He circled the kitchen island, his eyes narrowed. He stopped in front of the refrigerator. He stared at the drawings, the magnets, the crooked photo from the park. Then he reached out a long, slender finger and gently tapped the rooster magnet holding up the picture. He said, his tone utterly unreadable. He turned to face them, his expression giving nothing away. A family of very specific taste. Adria's heart seized. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. Rowan stepped forward slightly, placing himself in Jean-Pierre's line of sight, a subtle move that drew the chef's attention. "The rooster is my daughter's contribution," Rowan said calmly, nodding toward the garish cookie jar. "She believes every kitchen needs a rooster." Jean-Pierre's eyes shifted to Rowan, taking in his simple clothes and the quiet confidence in his stance. "Ah," he said. "The father. I see. The chaos has an architect." His gaze swept the room again, this time with a different kind of scrutiny. He was not just looking at the objects. He was reading the story. He glided over to the stove, a top-of-the-line wolf range that was immaculately clean. "A magnificent machine," he murmured, running a finger over the steel. He turned to Adria, his eyes sharp. "You must cook for the boy often. What is his favorite dish that you prepare for him?" It was a dagger of a question, aimed directly at her. Rowan stood perfectly still, offering no help. This was her test. Adria's mind went blank. Pasta? Macaroni and cheese? The answers felt generic, false. She remembered Rowan's words. Listen to what they're not saying. She thought of Finn in the park, of Alara on the floor with her rocks. What was real? "He likes dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets," she said, the words feeling foreign and honest on her tongue. Her gaze met the chef's, but only when Rowan makes them. He says I always burn them. A dead silence fell over the room. Adria braced for the accusation, the knowing smirk. Jean-Pierre stared at her for a long, unbearable moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, booming, genuine sound that filled the entire penthouse. "Magnifique!" he roared, clapping his hands together. "A mother who admits she cannot cook. This is the most authentic ingredient in the entire apartment." He beamed at them, his previous severity melting away into pure artistic delight. "Now I understand. This is a kitchen of love, not of technique. This I can work with. This has soul." The tension snapped. Adria felt a giddy wave of relief so strong it almost made her laugh too. They had passed. She had passed. After the chef left, having pronounced the kitchen perfectly imperfect, Adria and Rowan stood in the middle of the living room, the fake home they had built around them. "You were good," Rowan said quietly. "I told the truth," she replied, a note of wonder in her voice. "It was easier than lying." The days leading up to the dinner were a blur of calculated preparations. They coached Finn, turning their fake history into a game of spy school. Rowan would ask, "Agent Finn, where did your mom and I have our first date?" And Finn would giggle and say the answer they'd invented, "The hot dog stand by the Science Museum." They spent evenings in the stage department, learning the rhythms of a life that wasn't theirs. Adria learned that Rowan took his coffee with 2 sugars. Rowan learned that Adria had a secret fondness for old black and white movies. They were building a fortress of lies, but the bricks were small, startling truths about each other. The night of the dinner arrived. The penthouse was filled with the warm, savory smells of Jean-Pierre's cocoa vin. The lights were dimmed. A half-played game of Monopoly was on the coffee table. Finn, dressed in a smart sweater, was showing Rowan a new drawing. For a single, surreal moment, looking at the scene, Adria felt a pang of longing for it to be real. Rowan, looking surprisingly at ease in a borrowed blazer, caught her eye and gave her a small, reassuring nod. They were a team. They were ready. The doorbell rang. Showtime. Rowan opened the door. Matilda Dean stood there beaming, a bottle of expensive wine in her hand. "It smells divine," she declared, sweeping into the room. "Adria, Rowan, your home is just wonderful, so full of life." "Matilda, welcome," Adria said, her voice smooth. "I do hope you don't mind," Matilda said, turning back toward the doorway. "I ran into someone on my way in, and I simply insisted he pop in for a drink before the investors arrive." She smiled brightly. "A little reunion." A man stepped into the apartment from the hallway. He was a portly, balding man with a kind but bureaucratic face that Rowan recognized with a jolt of ice-cold dread. It was Ken Henderson, the company's head of human resources. Matilda gestured warmly between the 2 men. "You remember Ken, don't you, Rowan? From your department." Ken Henderson's friendly smile froze on his face as he looked at Rowan. Ken was the man who had personally processed Rowan's employment paperwork, the man who knew his official job title was Custodial Services, who knew his listed home address was a second-floor walk-up in a different borough, and who knew that his marital status, clearly stated on Form W-4, was widowed. The man from HR stared at the janitor who was pretending to be the CEO's partner, and his brain visibly tried to solve an impossible equation. The air crackled. Ken Henderson's friendly smile faltered, replaced by a look of profound confusion. He was a man of data and processes. His brain was trying to reconcile the file in his head. Rowan Astor, Custodial Services, widowed, with the man in the borrowed blazer standing proprietarily in the COO's penthouse next to a child that wasn't his listed dependent. The equation did not compute. Adria felt the blood drain from her face. This was it, the end. A single word from Ken, and the entire house of cards would fold. But Rowan didn't give him the chance to speak. Before the silence could curdle into an accusation, he stepped forward and extended his hand to the HR chief, his grip firm, his eyes level. "Ken, it's good to see you outside the office," Rowan said, his voice a paradigm of calm. The simple, confident action forced Ken's hand. He automatically shook Rowan's, his mind still reeling. "Rowan, yes, you too. This is a surprise." Adria, jolted into action by Rowan's lead, found her voice. "Ken, wonderful to see you. Rowan has told me so much about the fantastic work your department does with employee wellness. We were just discussing it." She manufactured a brilliant smile, linking her arm through Rowan's, a gesture of ownership that was both a performance for Matilda and a lifeline for herself. Matilda, still beaming, saw only a happy reunion. "So you two know each other well then?" she asked Ken. Ken opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his CEO, who was now clinging to the arm of a man he knew to be a janitor. He was trapped. We've crossed paths," he stammered. Matilda turned her still sharp gaze to Rowan. "Adria mentioned your background was in facilities management, a vital role." The direct question landed in the center of the room. This was the moment of implosion. Rowan looked at Ken, a brief, clear message passing between them. "Follow my lead." He then turned to Matilda, his expression open and sincere. "Matilda," he began, his voice steady, "Adria has been generous in her description of my job. The truth is, that's not where I started." He paused, letting the anticipation build. Adria held her breath. "When I first came to this company, I was in custodial services," Rowan said plainly. "I was the night shift janitor on the executive floor. That's how we met." An audible silence fell over the penthouse. Matilda's smile froze. Ken Henderson looked like he might faint. Adria, realizing the genius of Rowan's play, jumped in, her voice filled with a warmth that was almost real. "It's true," she said, looking at Rowan with a soft, practiced adoration. "I'd see him late at night when I was working on budgets. He was so quiet, so dignified. He never seemed impressed by any of this." She gestured around the expensive room. "Frankly, he was the most grounded person I'd ever met." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I asked him out for coffee. He turned me down 3 times. Ken Henderson's jaw went slack. He was no longer trying to reconcile an employment file with a lie. He was witnessing the secret office romance of the decade. His confusion instantly reframed itself as shock. "He said he didn't want to complicate his life," Adria continued, weaving the fiction with threads of truth, especially with a young daughter at home. "So we kept it quiet, very quiet, for a long time. It was only recently that we decided—" She trailed off, squeezing Rowan's arm. The news story was perfect. It was scandalous, romantic, and deeply humanizing. It explained everything. Rowan's simple clothes, his lack of corporate polish, the secrecy, Ken's surprise. It turned Rowan from a liar into a man of integrity, and Adria from a ruthless CEO into a woman who valued character over status. Matilda Dean stared at them, her mind processing the bombshell. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Well, I'll be," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "A janitor and a CEO." She looked at Rowan, her respect for him visibly deepening. "Young man, you are a far better judge of character than half my board." She then turned to Adria. "My dear, you are full of surprises, and I am delighted by every single one of them." The crisis had passed. Not only had they survived, they had triumphed. The rest of the dinner was a resounding success. The Japanese investors arrived and were utterly charmed by the story of the company's fairy tale romance. Finn, relaxed and confident, told them all about Fenris. Ken Henderson, sipping his wine, looked at Rowan with a newfound respect and a touch of fear. Later, after the guests had departed, leaving a pleasant buzz in their wake, the 3 of them stood alone in the living room. The stage department felt different now, imbued with the truth of the evening's performance. Finn, exhausted, was asleep on Rowan's armchair. The adrenaline faded, leaving a quiet intimacy in its place. Adria looked at Rowan, who was gently draping the hand-knitted afghan over her sleeping son. She wasn't looking at a janitor or a fake partner anymore. She was looking at the man who had navigated an impossible situation with a grace and intelligence she'd never witnessed before. He hadn't just saved her lie. He had told a better, truer story. "Rowan," she said, her voice quiet in the still room. "Who are you?" Rowan looked at the woman before him, the CEO whose empire he had just saved with a story about being a janitor. Her question hung in the air, simple and vast. "Who are you?" He walked over to the armchair where Finn was sleeping, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He gently adjusted the afghan, his large hand lingering for a moment on the boy's hair. "I'm Ilara's dad," he said, his voice low and even, not turning to face her, "and I'm the man who fixes things when they're broken." He finally turned, his gaze meeting hers. It was devoid of judgment, holding only a quiet weariness. "That's it. That's the whole story." Adria shook her head. "No, it's not." She walked toward him, her expensive heels silent on the plush rug. "What you did tonight, it wasn't fixing something. It was building it. From nothing. From a lie." "The best stories have some truth in them," he said. "You love your son. You were scared of failing him. I use that." They stood in the quiet of the apartment, the remnants of the party around them, a few stray wine glasses, a plate of half-eaten canapes. Without a word, they began to clean up, moving around each other in an unspoken domestic rhythm. Adria, the CEO who outsourced every aspect of her life, found herself rinsing wine glasses in the sink while Rowan gathered plates. The silence was comfortable, companionable. It was the silence of soldiers after a battle, of partners after a long day's work. "The board meeting is on Friday," Adria said, her back to him as she carefully placed a glass in the dishwasher. "Matilda called me after she left. She said my contract extension is a formality." She was giddy. "She loves the story of us." "That's good," Rowan said. "That's what you wanted." "Yes," she said. "It is." She dried her hands and turned to face him. "So, after Friday, the deal is over. I suppose you can take your armchair back then." She said it as a statement, but it felt like a question, a hopeful, terrified question. Rowan looked at the chair, at the sleeping boy curled within its worn embrace. He thought about hauling it back down the elevator, leaving a perfectly shaped void in this room. He thought about Finn, waking up in the morning and finding the chair, his safe place, gone. "He feels safe with you," Adria said, her voice barely a whisper, as if she'd read his mind. He's never been this calm, this happy." Her polished armor was gone, leaving only a raw, vulnerable mother. The lie worked on Matilda, but the truth, Rowan. The truth is, it's working on him. This was the new complication. The goal had been achieved. The threat was gone. But in the process of building the lie, they had created something fragile and real. To tear it down now would be a different kind of cruelty. "What are you saying, Adria?" Rowan asked, needing her to say it. "I'm saying, maybe the arrangement continues," she said, her eyes pleading. "Not for the board, not for Matilda, for him, until he's stronger, until I'm better at this." Rowan walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. He had his quiet life back within his grasp. He could take his daughter and disappear back into the peaceful anonymity he cherished. But he knew he couldn't. He had started this. He had shown this boy what a father's presence felt like. He couldn't just turn it off. He had to keep showing up. "Okay," he said, turning back from the window. "For Finn." A single tear traced a path down Adria's cheek. She wiped it away impatiently. "Okay." 3 months later, the penthouse was unrecognizable. The messy, staged clutter had been replaced by the genuine, chaotic clutter of a real family. The Saturday morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. In the kitchen, Rowan, dressed in an old t-shirt and jeans, was flipping pancakes. The air was thick with the smell of batter and melting butter. On the living room floor, Ilara and Finn were in the middle of a complex architectural project involving every Lego brick they owned. Finn was explaining the structural importance of a load-bearing column for their space fortress, and Ilara was insisting it needed more sparkly pink windows. Their bickering was a happy, constant hum. Adria sat at the kitchen island. She was wearing a pair of gray sweatpants and one of Rowan's old soft sweatshirts. Her hair was in a messy bun, and she held a coffee mug, the one that said, "Don't talk to me until I've had my coffee." She wasn't checking emails. She wasn't reviewing reports. She was watching her son and his sister. She was watching her family. "You're getting good at this," Rowan said, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of her. This doing-nothing thing. She smiled, a real, easy smile that reached her eyes. "It's harder than it looks, far more complex than a corporate acquisition." "I know," he said, leaning against the counter next to her. "The stakes are much higher." They watched the kids play. Finn, no longer a silent, anxious ghost, was now a confident, chattering boy. He still had moments of shyness, but they were fleeting. He had a father figure who listened, who taught him how to skip stones and how to fix a wobbly bicycle chain. Later that afternoon, Adria found herself alone in her home office. The space was still sleek and professional, but there were changes. A photo from the park, the real one Rowan had taken, sat on her desk. Next to it was a lopsided clay pot Finn had made in art class, holding a collection of her pens. She opened her desk drawer and her fingers brushed against a smooth, flat stone. She pulled it out. It was the worried face rock Ilara had given her that first night at Rowan's apartment. Adria had slipped it into her pocket then, a secret, tangible reminder of a world she didn't understand. She looked at the rock, then at the photo of her new, impossible, beautiful family. She walked over to the window that overlooked the city, the empire she commanded. For months, she had been terrified of losing it. Now she realized she had been fighting for the wrong kingdom all along. She placed the small, worried rock on the corner of her desk, right next to the picture, a silent, daily reminder of what truly mattered. The doorbell rang. It was Rowan and the kids, back from their trip to the Science Museum. Finn and Ilara burst into the room, both talking at once, arguing about whether a T-Rex could beat a shark in a fight. Rowan followed them in, a knowing smile on his face. He met Adria's eyes, a look of quiet understanding passing between them. They hadn't planned this. They hadn't negotiated it. They had simply started by pretending and then forgot to stop. They had built a family the way you build a home, one messy, imperfect, honest piece at a time. The story of the CEO and the janitor was the one the world knew, but the story of Adria and Rowan, of Finn and Ilara, was the one they were living. And it was a much, much better story. And so we place another story onto the shelf. Each one of these feels like a different little world we get to visit for a while, doesn't it? I have a question for you. If you were building a library of human experiences, what title would you give this story? The Art of Forgiveness? A Long Road Home? I'm genuinely curious what you'd label it. Drop your title in the comments. This library is something we are all building together. When you subscribe, you're helping us find and preserve the next story that needs to be told. The like button just helps new visitors find this particular aisle. It is an absolute honor to be building this collection with you. Thank you for everything. I'll see you for the next one.